SheerLee with Sirius Talis Moon. This is Jupiter. Our Sol date is basically Jupiter night. Jupiter is retrograde 19 degrees Cancer. The Moon is 6 degrees Scorpio, controlling the Ascendant at 8 degrees Scorpio, and the Midheaven 13 degrees Leo. Sol is 21 degrees Capricorn, together with Mars. Still the residues of the triple conjunction, and Venus is 23 degrees Capricorn. Yeah. Sol, Mars in Capricorn. So we only have Mercury to go through the threshold of opposing Jupiter. And as we approach this very opposition, I want to talk about education. Um, as the laws towards a changing world, perhaps a more global and more local at the same time world, happen, then there are many considerations, also historical considerations, and many things that are brought to the table by many groups that want to have their own ideologies installed. Saturn Neptune brings the death of the old, particularly the death of the old myths, but it can also be the beginning of the new myths. Okay, if we think about the Soviet Union, which was the most recent, and previously the previous one, the death of Stalin, um, both of them were marking different futures and deaths of ideology. Stalin did not have a doctor. The Soviet Union could have people living together regardless of societal class almost, but could not abolish extortion cult, which is why it fell. The Bolshevik Revolution was founded by both the schooling and the literal funding of gas and oil companies, namely Standard Oil, the Rockefeller family, which also ran an extortion cult. And this limits the produce of the Soviet Union. And I here don't criticize the Soviet Union um, in the sense that it was good or bad. Okay, for example, there is a woman that is a working lady at the side of the street. I know that people in her situation usually trafficked. I don't know if she is trafficked in the sense that that there is a pimp or something like that, and the community doesn't um, gather autonomously to make sure this woman have housing independent of need to have sex, um, let alone food. So it means that our entire community in city is susceptible to basically be destroyed, which is understandable. Um, and that's just one example of how a society um, can be so susceptible, whereas in certain times, in a society that's built on everybody living in the same, I don't know, building complex from the professor to um, basically the cleaning person, the children of everyone playing in the same kindergarten, carpets on the walls, yes, and also the architect. So, um, but schooling for everyone, which means literacy. And I know that John D. Rockefeller wanted working people, not thinking people, but it is the very alphabet that can be used for both. And one would need time and circumstances, and yet the fact, and it's not even the fact that Rockefeller was the founder or it was an oil company, but the fact that they ran extortion cold, which means that the training of the intelligence would be by rape, which undermines the foundations of every nation and every oil company. Okay, this is it's the truth. Um, and so what would happen is that there was a great idea that fell flat at human trafficking and extortion cult. If not for human trafficking and extortion cult, we could build different cities that accommodate for more people. We could still have um, perhaps a sobering up or perhaps a bit more individuation, but still, and I have to say until today, Soviet people or people that came from Soviet Union, they trust doctors too much. And the reason they trust doctors too much is because a lot of the medicine would be preventative. Okay? In fact, the many doctors that came to Israel during the 1990s and had no license to be doctors here. Now, I'm not saying that the medicine was perfect, yes, but if a person was a school teacher for elementary school, they had to know about all the herbs, they had to know about music, they had to be very, very, very educated to be an elementary school teacher, whereas in Israel it's not necessarily so. And unfortunately, it's not like, oh, they get trained to how to deal with children. No, they don't. It's, yes, they get some training, but it's not really. When I was private teacher, then people ask me, why don't you teach in schools? I'm like, if I could do that, I could run an empire. 40 kids. Yes, because we had 40 kids classes before COVID, and it's normal for them to be energetic. It's normal for them to rebel. It's not normal to stand in front of 40 kids and expect them to receive uh, um, teachings from one person, um, not necessarily being the smartest or street smartest in the class. So, regardless of what I know in life, um, because really each of them coming from a different family, a different place, and knows different things. So, and my teachings might not be relevant for them. Um, for example, an important question to ask yourself is what if Hitler had a different history teacher? Now, there is a discussion that always begins with one group, and that discussion was about should women get education? Okay, um, again, it's not the first time that it rises in history. In fact, the entire Enlightenment was not Enlightenment before women actually entered academia. And then the women that did were not really, they had to go through the rites and humiliation rituals, um, so much so that some of them became antithetical, okay, to believing that Marquise de Sade was free. And that is, okay, that is um, to torture a child by the church, but in the case of Marquise de Sade, until torturing others is the only form of outlet, and the fact that there was a woman there that related to that, okay, namely, I think it was Simone de Beauvoir. So it shows us that while educated women do not always solve the problems of society. She could not go against the Masons. Um, Maybe she was not exactly a woman, I don't know. Um, and the first, one of her famous saying, "A woman is not born, is made," in light of what is done to the elite, could be very literal, genital wise. Um, and I'm not saying that this was the true, but she was definitely being the truth, saying that a torturer um, of trafficked women, basically, was a free man or free soul. Okay, if he committed suicide, he would have been more free soul than if he had tortured. By the way, um, because he would have taken sovereignty over the act of torture and voted out with his life. It's way more manly and way more free. Um, okay, if all the people who would take to commit an act of torture towards their fellow men and women would commit suicide instead, we would vote out the act of torture from humanity. Okay, I'm not talking about shaming or blaming Marquis de Sade. In fact, it's more the shame of the church that it created um, basically that. And no, he's not the father of BDSM. It says, those who think that Marquis de Sade is father of BDSM um, are not practicing BDSM. Um, and one doesn't have to be kinky to say that. Um, in fact, people that actually practice kink say that. Now, regarding education, the minute we deprive women of education, and Marquis de Sade is a great example, men would be put into slavery and torture. We cannot have enslavement of men without oppression of women. If oppression of women is allowed, it is moral and just to enslave the men that allowed for oppression of women. Um, but not for several generations, okay? Because then it would be men that did not know freedom. Yes, if a woman is not raped because her fellow men that were the rapists are enslaved, it's better for that woman, and it's better for humanity, and it's better for that society. I'm not saying that's how slavery happened one to one, but definitely without enslaving women or oppressing women within the society, it would be very difficult to enslave men. In fact, exploitation, slavery, has no stranglehold on society when there is zero rape society. And here I mean not just women, but also within the secret societies, which is men of children, men of men, and so on and so forth. Just like in a society where men rape the men, even though it happens in secret, then women, unfortunately, are also harmed. Okay? The men can talk about it, what happens, nobody knows, nobody knows. Then men harm women. Women protest, and then the men talk about all kinds of weird things, except for the fact that they are raped in their own societies. And it would actually need to be the brave men and the brave women to um, stand against this act of rape, um, which is why I said before Pluto ingress to Aquarius, Vulcan, get out of the lodges if you can. because it's persecution time, and it's persecution because of the ritual abuse done in the higher degrees. Um, so yes, the Soviet Union fell not on the material or the economy strategy. There is more than one way to do economy that can be successful, but on extortion cults. And when it comes to education, slaved men, slaves, are usually also illiterate. The When they want to not educate women, the next step is to have segments of society, namely men, being illiterate, um, which means that they cannot read it when the publicist writes about depriving them of their rights. It means that they cannot read the legal documents that they are supposed to be adhering to. In fact, before Napoleon, and this is a big shout out to um, Psycryptoria, okay? There's a channel that deals with all the bullshit. The times where women were gold diggers, the times where women supposedly betrayed men because the men were rapists, but whatever. Um, but also the shit that women did, the shit that men did. It really talks about everything. And before Napoleon um, sent men to war, he deprived women of their rights. Now, why did he do that? Yes, let's say a woman has equal rights. First of all, what happens right now? A lot of baby boomers. Why? In Europe and in United States. Um, because if there is war, then the men want to be at home, and one great way is to make babies. Napoleon forbade that. He forbade that by having every legal decision of the woman being forced to be with the approval of her man. And this was a Machiavellian technique. He made the men feel powerful over the women. But then, when the men would go to war, they would not be able to get away. Let's say if a man got a woman pregnant, he didn't have to support the child, but he also couldn't say, hey, I got a woman pregnant. I need to stay to care for the child. I cannot go to the frontier. And that's the money line, that's the end game. It basically means that the men could not have been recruited to war forcibly without the fact that the men had let women's rights bypass and allowed it. And then they died at war. It was impossible to recruit men to war when women's rights were kept. And if men, of course, are abusive to women, Elvira talks about it in the Soviet Union. The men would not have, I don't know, a community that is not based on depriving women of their rights. Um, so they would feel like something is missing. I don't know, life mission and so on, because it's a big empire that deprived them and emasculated them, and emasculated their sovereignty. Okay, which is okay. If there is a big tyrannical regime, men cannot be men. So they drink and they beat the wife and they feel powerful over the wife. Now, what does the wife do? It ideates the leader because the leader sends them to war. Elvira, okay, this is now the solution would be a sovereign regime that has equal rights to men and women, and thereby to LGBTQs. Okay, without equal rights to men and women, the gender non-conforming cannot exist because without zero rape society and zero ritual abuse society, um, we would think we are going for gay rights while we are going for um, extortion cults rights. It's basically what it is. And so, and then we would be convinced that there is no such thing as LGBTQ without actually having seen a zero rape society and zero ritual abuse society, um, and the fact that people already went through forced gender changes. Anya Wick talked about it a lot, and that can. And again, I said the name of the people who said it outright. I know that's difficult to speak in those societies, um, but this is, and I was shown the person is going to forced sex change, and then it's called clone. No, sometimes it's like that, and sometimes people really are born in unregistered births and cloned methods. So it's both that and uh, now now um, when we know to identify, because those campaigns, how would men want women to not have rights? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make men sense. But this would only happen when they would have extortion cults, because then they everybody would be tortured, and then they wouldn't know why it's happening, and it would cause separations. People would blame one another in betrayal, and instead of uniting against extortion cults, then what would happen is that people would want to have women not in academia, and that would be more important than, because they would feel heartbroken or suddenly left or suddenly this. Um, but if they partook in rituals to oppress women, because instead of creating society where women have rights, they created the opposite and then wondered why they're friend zoned. um, or, but it's true. If you create a society where women cannot be, because you live in a secret society and so on and so forth, um, eventually also women had to rebel. And and anyway, either that entire society would be persecuted and destroyed, or there would be rebellion. And they cannot blame women. The women, first of all, usually women don't know because they are, when they are in societies, they have to do treason against women, and those women still speak about this fact. Then this shows, okay, the minute women have rights, men don't go to war as much. Either because they have the ability to whether have a baby and or even adopt a baby, and the man needs to take care of, like, they have to, he has to be there as a father. um, or that women demonstrate against sending their children, for example, to war for mothers in Israel. It's only the extortion cults that are the intelligences that are trained by trafficking, and those societies undermine the security of every nation under the guise of being security, and the security of themselves. It causes persecution, so on and so forth. That's why the Soviet Union fell. It fell over the extortion cults. The architecture of the buildings could be changed. People working together and sharing resources should not be. It is, first of all, it's happening also in capitalism. It's just that in capitalism, let's say, is more like, I'm talking about capitalism, not corporatism. Both capitalism and socialism are supposed to yield the same results in terms of distribution of wealth. If it doesn't happen, it's an argument against the validity of capitalism that assumes that, let's say, somebody gets very rich, they have they create jobs, and each and every person can have the American dream, sozusagen. Um, and what would make that wealth not stream downwards is if this rich person has to pay for extortion cults, and this is where the money leaks away from the system. In fact, a lot of some Gen Zs and even Pluto Capricorns are working in either plumbing or even cleaning. There was a guy that has a cleaning company, and he said the people that have 10 million plus, they don't pay this much. He said, the minute I raised my prices, because I became a service company, cleaning service, and not just labor, a cleaner, they didn't want anything to do, and they would never give tips and so on and so forth. But the people that have money, but not the richest, they are always generous with the tips and so on, because they appreciate labor. The people say, oh, they don't have to work for their living. Yes, they do have to work for their living. But they are saving money to pay for extortion cult for the time they had to do a business deal with another person that had to sign, I don't know, but NDA or whatnot, which is illegal, of course. And then they will put something, drug in their whatnot, taken to a room. A child had a handler. The handler made the child supposedly plant urges, and it works only with business people that were already tortured as children. And the drugs, perhaps different, um, but then the child gets pregnant. They have to pay money. That is a lot of money, and they don't have money to pay the cleaning services. That's dirty. I know it's dirty, but that's true. That's where the money goes. It goes to the extortion codes, um, and that's why they say, oh, they have to pay, and we have the dualistic of Neptune. Neptune is megalithic wealth as well, so the dual phase of Neptune, where they have to pay attention and count every penny, but then pay all these pennies to extortion cult. Um, because when they consolidated wealth, they were, I don't know, in a party or in a this or in a that, networking, and that was a part of that. Epstein Island is basically network. It's networking. That's why the people were there. They fought teeth to bone to basically get into these societies because they have to be invited. For example, there are certain circles where Donald Trump is not invited, but he was still rubbing shoulders with Epstein, like the rest of them. Again, red pill with Bill Clinton, and so on and so forth. And it's enough to have something in the drink, and then person is drugged up, and they have an onset for the torture that they already did to them, because these people are growing into class. So basically, They were tortured as children. There was ritual abuse as children. And they create this class that, on the one hand, it's like it's a club and you're not invited. On the other hand, you don't really want to participate. It is. And yet, when it comes to the resource allocation, it's not, no economy stands the test of time because of extortion cults. It doesn't matter what is the economic perception, those things can be overcome. Why did the zero usury bank, we had Bank of Amsterdam, thanks financial historian and chill financial historian, why did Bank of Amsterdam, zero usury bank, before the Second World War, before Hitler, before everyone, zero usury bank, went bankrupt? It's not vogue. It's the particular type of thing called extortion cults that necessitated having a red book, a different accountant's book that is secret. It's true, Vogue took the gold and brought silver, but Vogue also ran extortion cults that got the zero usury bank to pay the money. Now, one could even claim that Vogue got the money back to Vogue because these were the children. We don't know how was that gold accumulated. Some of it was the gold of the people, but not all of it. And it was those people that didn't know about. There was no. Maybe there was a dead through the seers back then, but um, but this is exactly how money gets lost. The money goes missing with the dead bodies of the children buried in the rituals. The money gets lost with the bodies of the children that are the expendable children. Why do they talk about worrying for continuation of the bloodline of men when we don't even have enough rare earth minerals to accommodate for all these children? Because they use them in bloodletting rituals. They use the children in bloodletting rituals. Woman is not educated, cannot read the legal documents, and cannot fight. She can poison her husband, but that's pretty much what she can do. There's the only raison d'etat to have uneducated women to continue bloodline is so that these children would be used in bloodletting rituals. And if these men are so naive that they don't know that even, then I don't know how they got red pilled. But it is. It is so. But this is the and this is going to the raison d'etat that the minute the rights of one of our communities is deprived, then the rest follows. And when it comes to education, see, why did Stalin did not have doctor? The many people that try to get people into poverty, by the way, regardless of gender, so that they can extort them to do crime or to traffic them, because they need money for the body doesn't absorb any type of treatment well when a person is in such conditions. And those people that do that, they will also need medical care. Stalin, for example, no longer had a doctor. Now, I can raise awareness, but if those people are um, Epstein Island had a dentist torture chamber. This is the timeline of the Holocaust. To remove the timeline of the Holocaust is to remove the extortion codes that create Holocausts. Because if the dentist had to get certification and to make enough money to be the dentist of the elite, they had to rub shoulders with Epstein. That's the dentistry that our elite has. And so Stalin did not have a doctor. it is and those people that um, that are unaware, when particularly since Saturn square Uranus, so many cases of medical negligence regarding dentistry. And Israel used to be so well known that people would come from other countries to do to do their teeth here. It's expensive. And this pertains to education. If people need to go through the filter of extortion codes, which are torture code, treason code, to get certification as a doctor, for example, this begins with depriving women of education. Now, if women can only be educated when they run through extortion codes themselves, it doesn't solve the problem. Okay, this is why Israel was a weird case in that notion. But to some degree, so is the United States, Ghislaine Maxwell. Um, and again, this is something that it's not something I saw from one channel. Okay, I saw main discussion attempts to get women out of academia, um, particularly around COVID, because I guess as women tend to prevent such disasters more. It is. So um, I don't know why. Like there isn't a reason the men wouldn't, but I think that the men that tend to prevent such disasters and speak up are, as as I was working in marketing for many years, and it was like, yeah, they have to ask the wife first, but um, they do express their opinions, but they would also be detained or assassinated, um, and this is why we'd hear about this less. In fact, so most of the men that speak up for women's rights are fathers. And I don't know why one has to wait to be a father, but Napoleon tried to forbid even that. Um, this goes to the rules that said that only the man takes the family name and so on and so forth, um, which were in many segments of the East. Um, now that the East is rising, when something is rising, it tends to all the darkness that needs to be purged, so that it's actually rising. And now the East is rising, and um, and this means that we tend to the fact that in many cultures, not just Chinese cultures, there would be desire that it would be boy born because the boy continues the family name. By the way, feminism changed that. For example, the families where there are either only daughters or there's actually the daughter that continues the family business. Um, and it came many times from governments and government laws. If the government laws that a woman cannot open a business on her name, then who will continue the family business? Only the boy. If the people don't rise against that, now, in societies where it was, I don't know, hunter-gatherers, and then there would be no reason to go against that, and it's not that people were unhappy. It's like, hey, the woman is going, picking up the mushrooms, speaking with her friends, family gathering, making food, and the men come from work, and everybody eats and have a good time. It's not. I'm not saying that those were bad societies, or that is. There's no one way to have a society. But I am talking about the power moves that are done on societies to engineer societies. And if two men, for example, argue, do I want a woman who is educated or do I want a woman who is not educated? That's totally legit conversation. Okay, because a woman is educated, yes, you will probably have less children. You want a big family, okay. But when we talk about a standard or a societal standard, this is where things begin to be weird, because that is where entire societies can be enslaved or depopulated. And the children, they're left as orphans. And these orphans are trafficked, raped, tortured, going into extortion cults. I believe no father, even somewhat red-pilled, would want their children, boys or girls, to be ending in this way. Yes? Unless they already are so tortured that that is the inclination. And unfortunately, in extortion cults, that type of thing exists. Um, and that torture is seen as the continuation of the bloodline. One of the things that was exposed to when I talked about extortion cults was basically that was for many parents that how they raised their children because they thought they make them stronger, and that was how they were raising their children. Um, and and when something is so convoluted, it's very difficult. Just like in the in my I'm a millennial. In my generation, and even some rarely in previous generations, it was only the beginning of parents that don't beat their children. My mother was proud that she doesn't beat me, and I, a newborn, born into the world, is like she's proud that she doesn't. I have Uranus in the 10th house, so it's she's proud that she does. Where is she? Like, and a child doesn't have their parents as example, and you see people around, and then it's kind of like people used to beat their children. Didn't the children kill the parents or something? In extortion cults, they did, but it is. And by the way, that's how they got them to. Um, but parents had to get used to emotional intelligence. Now, what about societies that the men that are raped are called whores, and then they cannot be intimately with the woman because if they are intimate with her, they can only rape. They don't know And even the only time they know how to do something that's not rape is to use as a bait to lover boy scams. But this is true. Essentially, a healthy relationship doesn't sustain in those conditions, and so they cannot see a woman as a woman. They can only see a woman as whore or as mother, Madonna, whore. Otherwise, they wouldn't be cheating on their wives. Okay, it's not about non-monogamy because it's a commune of people. No. So these people, first of all, how can they be fathers? Their children can be a child if they don't rape children. Usually they do. And then the minute the child becomes teenager, it becomes whore. The concept, the psychosexual concept, is not existing for women. When there is extortion and trafficking cults, all the women suffer, all the men suffer. There is no sex. There is trafficking. Even when the young men become aware that these, let's say, sites or whatnot, when I did my academic degree about the body-mind question, um, one of the segments tended to sexuality, and um, there was a case where young men were watching porn and they were getting erectile dysfunction because they were watching more and more violent scenes that would come from dopamine. And this is basically um, the young men needed therapy for erectile dysfunction. Okay, they were watching porn, they were not, and then they needed more and more violent scenes. They became addicted to violence, and orgasms are very important because, okay, or later they learn manifestation technique with sexuality, but they use it without consent of the partner. So they would learn how to have sex, but there would be a component of treason in it because they would not manifest as a couple. Um, when people have sex with one another and they do manifestation, okay, then both have to agree on what they manifest, just like babies. Now, in societies where women are not raped, less likely to have stealing of sperm, for example. Yes, I'm not saying sometimes there are women that really want to be mothers and so on and so forth. They can go to legal procedures of becoming a mother. There is a sperm bank and so on and so forth. Um, um, but with societies where there are extortion cults, then it means that those women had handlers. It's one of the ways that they try to control the population is to get into the most intimate level of communication of people and intervene there. If they can get men to blame women for stealing sperm rather than the extortion cults for torturing and mind controlling, then they basically manage to turn men and women against one another. And if they did that, they can turn entire nations against one another. Um, so education can be one of the great remediations for that. For education, we need literacy. For example, people that don't have astrological literacy, they can be psychologists and they have a patient that goes through Neptune in their seventh house. They could, diagnose this patient with all kinds of myriad of things. They're um, codependent, they're this, they're that. And while this may be true if the patient comes with, let's say, natal chart and they have some Neptunian issues to deal with, it can simply be that Neptune is going through their seventh house. So the teachings might be relevant of saying to this person, hey, Neptune is going through your seventh house. Um, Now those themes that are relevant to addiction and codependency regarding relations that sit on things that you didn't know you were missing in your upbringing, even if your parents were the best parents, those things come up in the coming 10 to 15 years. That's a framework that already doesn't set the patient as pathologic, but understands settings, and hey, that's the right time to tend and see what is coming up, what's underneath, and the awareness that eroticism, Neptune, can be associated with tremendous, with the great missing. And, and sometimes through um, being with the void around eroticism, one can be with the longing and understand what is missing. The grieving of that can manifest miraculous healing. Um, for example, the way extortion cults work is not that they only torture people, but they are the sole provider of the needs, the growth needs, whether it's a hug, whether it's being treated well, and so on and so forth. But they do this as a part of keeping people addicted to the cult. And it's done in big wealth families because they think it keeps the bonds. Thank you, Anya Wick, that pinpointed that. Um, and basically, just like they get nations addicted to opium and take the silver, they get the people addicted to the family and commit treason to get supposedly more silver that is only splurged on. I think a lot of these places have big mansions, but either not clean or big mansions, but something with these mansions because, how should I say that? Because it creates a great, it creates a financial bubble. They do have to pay a lot of money to extortion calls, and then they begin to say, oh, then I will run, then I will be the drug lord, then I would be the provider of the addiction thing. But they don't. How did they get, for example, Standard Oil as a monopoly to be dissolved? Okay, competing extortion calls. That's they can't say it. We won't hear it on the financial historian. Even now, when there's changing times and people have the desire to people to understand in finances because they have all kinds of agendas, and there's a window of opportunity to understand in finances. But this is the truth. That's the raison d'etre of if we connect one point with another, um, that we need to understand. That's why business aren't plummeting, even if they're made by rich people. Plummet is aren't peaking. Um, aren't peaking. Plummeting is the opposite. Um, but this is exactly what's behind this. If the Epstein family, and I don't mean Jeffrey Epstein, Anu Wick says her father did that to 3 years old. So if the Epstein family controlled the media, you couldn't be United States president without being in good relations with that media conglomerate. Um, And that means that there are only certain stories that can be published in such media. For example, in the Soviet regime, the country, the state controlled the media. For example, in Israel, even when I was a young girl, we had the Chinuchit, which was the government channel, and that was what we were watching. And were the children shows, whatever they do with the children, and those were children's stars. Okay, only when there began to be different type of regime. When Stalin died, Israel had been mourning the death of Stalin. So um, so media is a very big deal, and the people that did want to go into journalism, okay, beyond a certain level, they would have to get acquainted at least with Epstein. From acquainted to drugged and filmed with a child, for many of them it's a very short distance because they grew in environments that were oppressive towards the feminine. And the only time that they were allowed to feel if is they were baiting someone. Um, or about to drug someone. Yes, drug addictions and so on and so forth. But they also knew that the biggest wealth, you see, when I was in high school and we were in Young Entrepreneurs program by IBM and JP Morgan Chase, is basically the one behind. We were told IBM, but basically it was JP Morgan Chase. They weren't coming. I had students around me had even bigger innovations than me, and they weren't coming for those. They wanted to double the whole of the toothpaste because people spend more money. Saturn returned from that. Okay, when my generation came to Saturn return, we would have the tokens and bitcoins people committing suicide. Because JP Morgan Chase betrayed them after growing them. And I know because I was supposed to be one of them. I said, that's not that's what they wanted. We had a lot of innovation, which is the whole point of being an entrepreneur is to contribute to humanity. And that's the JP Morgan Chase. Now, for people that grew deeper into these circles, then they would rub shoulders with the people that they would need to rub shoulders with, which is extortion cults. Um, okay, can you have a dividend in Buffett's investments? No, you'd have to cross the threshold of, I think back then it was 200 million or something like that. It means that it's not every person can put their, I don't know, if every homeless could have put their, actually I had a pitch for investment companies. I said, before I knew about extortion calls, I said, hey, if every homeless in the street, if I give 5 shekels to a homeless, okay, let's say $1 to a homeless, and you say they take that dollar, put half of that dollar in investing, and we have a show that shows what does the dollar do for the age of air, and we have a full 24/7 live show on social media. We saw what did that dollar of that homeless do, because that homeless is supposed to be having a house. That's the raison d'etre of investment. Now, not only that, I'd have to see that each and one of those investments is not violating human rights or harming the ecosystem in a way that violates not only human rights. So I had a pitch. Nobody wanted to talk to me.